Robert Murray Hanson drew his first breath in the sweltering spring of 1920 amid the clamour of Lucknow's crowded streets, a world away from the thunder of Pratt & Whitney engines that would one day sear his name into the annals of Marine Corps. Aviation. His parents, American Lutheran missionaries, tended to lepers and orphans under the northern Indian sun, yet from earliest childhood he seemed destined for motion. When the family returned to the United States in 1928, they carried with them little more than a battered steamer trunk and a boy whose eyes already sought distant horizons. The rolling cornfields of Iowa could not rival the cacophony of Lucknow, but they offered open skies, and Robert spent long afternoons lying on farmhouse roofs, tracing vapor trails until dusk blurred the contrails into ribbons of rose-gold twilight. The onset of the Great Depression tightened belts across the Midwest, and Hanson learned the discipline of thrift and hard labor. He caddied at a local golf course, baled hay in July heat, and stacked lumber in the frost-stung dawns of December. Yet whatever coin he earned seldom stayed long in his pocket. More often he swapped wages for magazines full of aircraft cutaways or 30-minute flights at county airfields, the wobbling tail-dragger thrill that turned his stomach but left his heart ablaze. By 16, he could pick out the snarl of a Curtiss Hawk from the deeper growl of a Boeing P-12. And he kept notebooks filled with crude three-view drawings and imagined dogfights above the endless rows of corn. Teachers described him as reserved, bordering on aloof, but classmates remembered bursts of quicksilver humor and a stubborn perfectionism whenever competition appeared. College beckoned, briefly. He enrolled at Beloit College in Wisconsin, gravitating toward physics and mathematics. Yet each engine lecture rekindled visions of gull-winged fighters arcing across the Pacific. Newsreels of the Sino-Japanese conflict stiffened his resolve, for the world was sliding toward war, and he refused to watch from the bleachers. When a Navy recruiter set up a folding table outside the campus cafeteria in early 1941, Hanson signed the aviation cadet forms before lunch ended. Within weeks, he traded iced Wisconsin mornings for the salt-heavy heat of Pensacola. Flight training hammered the boy into an aviator. Pensacola's instructors were unforgiving, lecturing that gravity kept no favorites and the Gulf swallowed the careless with equal appetite. Hanson's hands, calloused from farm work, adapted quickly to stick and throttle. His instrument scores topped the class, but what stunned instructors was his instinctive sense of angle off and closure in aerial gunnery. He could read a deflection shot the way a pool shark reads the rails, one gunnery officer noted. By May 1942, Hanson wore the gleaming gold wings of a naval aviator and a freshly pressed second lieutenant's bar of the United States Marine Corps. His first operational assignment took him to the Solomon Islands as a replacement pilot in VMF 214, then a hodgepodge squadron flying tired F-4F Wildcats from cramped coral airstrips. The Wildcat demanded respect. It clawed skyward like a stubborn mule and bled speed in turns. Yet Hanson made peace with its quirks, coaxing every knot from the Grumman barrel as though gravity itself were negotiable. During that early autumn, he logged endless combat patrols over the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal, often returning with empty .50 caliber ammo cans and a cockpit mired in perspiration, but without a single scored victory. Some rookies grew despondent. Hanson simply waited. Opportunity announced itself on the dawn of October 25, 1942. A formation of 18 Zeros escorted bomb-laden Bettys toward Henderson Field, and VMF 214 scrambled to intercept. At Angels 15, Hanson spotted the Japanese. String glinting in the sun, banked hard, and dove through the formation like a hawk on a field mouse. His first burst ripped into a bomber's starboard engine, flames blossomed, and the aircraft cartwheeled into the sea. A Zero slid onto his tail, tracer streaks lashing past the Wildcat's canopy. Hanson yanked into a vertical climb, kicked rudder, and slid inverted behind his pursuer. 2 seconds of concentrated fire severed the Mitsubishi's fuselage behind. The cockpit. Marines on the ground whooped as the Zero fluttered apart above Bloody Ridge. Hanson had logged his first 2 kills in under 60 seconds. By early 1943, the Marine Corps re-equipped its frontline squadrons with the Vought F-4U Corsair, an aircraft as mercurial as the man who now flew it. The Corsair's inverted gull wings and brute 2,000 horsepower radial engine frightened even seasoned pilots on carrier approaches. But in the air, it was a prize fighter, fast, resilient, and deadly in the dive. Hanson embraced the beast with near religious fervor, naming his aircraft Fury and scrawling a tiny India map beneath the windscreen as a private talisman. Fellow pilots watched in awe as he flung the Corsair through chandelles and high-speed yo-yos that left others gasping. He was 23 years old, lanky, brown-haired, more at ease behind a gun sight than in front of a microphone. The summer of 1943 proved his crucible. VMF 215, the Fighting Corsairs, staged from Munda and Barracoma, launching daily sweeps over New Georgia and Bougainville. On August 6th, while top cover for dive bombers attacking Kahili, Hanson bounced a gaggle of Zeros. He shot one from 800 yards with a perfect high-angle snapshot, rolled inverted, and blew the tail off a second. As it tried to break downward, 3 more fell in the next 7 minutes. One exploded under concentrated fire, another spiraled into Rabaul Harbor, and the third disintegrated when its oxygen tanks ignited. The mission report credited Hanson with 5 confirmed victories, elevating him to ace status in a single sortie. 10 days later, he repeated the feat, bagging 4 Zeros and a Dyna reconnaissance twin, all before breakfast back at Barracoma. Those 14 days turned a quiet Midwestern farm boy into a living legend, whose score mounted too rapidly for the squadron artist to keep pace, painting rising sun flags beneath the cockpit. Yet if victory altered his demeanor, it did so subtly. He celebrated with root beer instead of whiskey, wrote humble letters home, and spent evenings teaching green replacement pilots the art of deflection, shooting by candlelight in the revetments. His courage was not reckless bravado, but a cool-blooded calculus visible in the gun camera film. He stalked adversaries with patient positioning, then closed to near point-blank range, unleashing lethal half-second bursts that saved ammunition and magnified effect. He never chased a cripple deep into enemy territory when the odds turned sour. His squadron commander observed, "Hanson flies as though every move is sketched out 3 moves ahead. He is chess at 400 miles per hour." In September, VMF 215 rotated stateside to rest and re-equip, but Hanson requested a combat extension, moving to VMF 221 on Guadalcanal for the continuing march up the Solomons. He could not shake the conviction that unfinished work awaited in the South Pacific. He also carried a new weight, the Medal of Honor recommendation forwarded after his August heroics. The paperwork wound through channels even as he strapped into another weather-beaten Corsair and lifted off into horizons bruised by monsoon squalls. The final phase of his meteoric career opened in January 1944 from the raw strip at Bougainville's Torokina Point. Allied forces were pressing the encirclement of Rabaul, and fighters prowled the sea lanes to choke off reinforcement barges. Hanson flew nearly every day, logging dawn-to-dusk sorties that blurred into each other. On January 24th, he downed 2 A6 M3s near Cape St. George, his 20th and 21st victories. 3 days later, he splashed an additional Zero, tying the squadron record. What spurred him now was less tally marks than the restless spirit that had followed him from Lucknow to Iowa to these volcanic atolls. On the grey morning of February 3rd, 1944, Hanson led a 2-plane armed reconnaissance toward Cape Gloucester, New Britain. Low Scud hugged the treetops, forcing them to fly scarcely 100 feet above the wave tops. Nearing Lingkung Point, he spotted a camouflaged Japanese freighter anchored close beneath a cliff, likely a munitions barge. He signaled his wingman to watch for flak, rolled into an attack run, and strafed the deck from bow to stern. Gunfire erupted from shore batteries, and a burst of 40mm shattered his windscreen. Witnesses on a nearby patrol saw Hanson wrestle the wounded corsair seaward, its prop arc spraying oil. At barely 50 feet altitude, the aircraft lurched, as if tripped, right wing dipping into the swell. The corsair cartwheeled, disintegrated, and vanished in a boiling rooster tail of grey water. The Pacific closed over him in seconds. Search planes circled for hours, dropping dye markers to guide rescue boats, but only floating wreckage was recovered. An oil-slicked life raft, a twisted ring sight, a battered kneeboard spattered with sea salt notes. Robert M. Hanson was 23 years old. His official score stood at 25 aerial victories, making him the Marine Corps' third highest-scoring ace of the war. Back in Bougainville, the chaplain addressed a mess hall congregation, telling them that courage bore many faces: the stoic grin before dawn takeoff, the steady hand on a control column riddled by tracers, the quiet guidance of rookies during midnight thunderstorms. Pilots placed a Corsair prop blade beside the runway edge, painting on it a single word: fury. In Washington, a Medal of Honor citation was hand-typed, describing Hanson's indomitable fighting spirit and valiant disregard for personal safety. His mother received the medal on the White House lawn, gently turning the blue ribbon as though weighing the heavens themselves. Yet medals and kill tallies cannot distill the essence of Robert Hanson. Fellow aviators spoke of the way he hummed Lutheran hymns over the interphone while forming up at dawn, how he insisted on writing thank-you notes to mechanics who patched bullet holes in his wing spars, how he crouched on pierced steel planking to sketch flight geometry in coral dust, so novices understood not merely the how, but the why of combat maneuvering. They recalled the faint accent that lingered from his Indian childhood and the shy half-smile that betrayed a hint of mischief. Whenever he rolled a cigarette with one hand, one Marine summarized, "Bob didn't chase glory. Glory tried to keep up with him and never quite could." His legacy rippled outward far beyond 1944. Replacement pilots adopted his disciplined gunnery techniques, citing the Hanson burst in squadron shorthand for economical trigger squeezes. Stateside factory workers painting Corsairs sometimes scrawled fury on engine cowlings for luck, unaware of the personal resonance the word carried. After the war, instructors at Pensacola referenced Hanson's gun camera footage to illustrate bounce tactics against enemy formations. In countless VFW posts across the American heartland, grey-haired Corsair veterans lifted toasts to a lanky Iowa lad who lived fast, flew true, and never lost his sense of duty to those around him. Perhaps the most poignant measure of his impact surfaced decades later in a memoir by one of the mechanics who serviced VMF 215's fighters. He confessed to struggling with post-war aimlessness until recalling Hanson's nightly habit of kneeling by his bunk and scribbling letters or sketches, as though the cockpit were only one dimension of living fully. "Bob made me believe discipline could be gentle," the mechanic wrote, "and that excellence was an act of gratitude." The South Pacific has long since surrendered its secrets to coral and tide, but somewhere off Cape Gloucester, a bent fragment of Pratt & Whitney cylinder head still lies silent, crusted with lichenous sea growth. If currents could carry song, you might hear the echo of hymn 358 drifting upward through the green water, a final contrail dissolving into the endless expanse. In that imagined hymn resides the enduring spirit of Major Robert Murray Hanson. Missionaries, son, farmhand's friend, consummate warrior, whose life, compressed into the briefest blaze of years, nevertheless illuminates the boundless sky for all who dare to chase it. Letters written in Robert Hanson's hurried scrawl continued to arrive at the family farmhouse in Iowa for weeks after his disappearance, their postmarks lagging behind his fate like phantom footfalls. In each, he apologized for the brevity. Too much flying, not enough night, he joked, and tucked small drawings of his corsair banking over jungle-wreathed ridges. His mother kept them in a cigar box that smelled faintly of aviation fuel, unwilling to break the wax seal on the final one until the telegram from Marine headquarters confirmed what her heart already sensed. Grief mingled with pride, for the language of next-of-kin notifications could not erase the soaring cadence of his own words. "I fly not for the tally, but because the sky leaves no man unchanged." News of his loss rippled through the Solomons. Like a hush before storm surf, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Smoke, Hanson's last commanding officer, grounded the squadron for half a day, forcing men who had lived by the hour to reckon with mortality before returning to the cockpit. They gathered at the pierced steel strip at Torokina that evening, 100 yards from the revetments where Hanson had sketched deflection angles in coral dust. There was no chaplain available, so Captain Harold "Indian Joe" Bauer recited Psalm 139 from memory, his voice catching on the line about wings of the morning. Someone produced a wind-up gramophone, and over the clatter of its mechanism they played Benny Goodman's "Flying Home," the clarinet rising like dawn over hushed palms. Pilots who seldom wept let tears mingle with rivulets of sweat, knowing the music would end and the next scramble siren would sound. Stateside, Hanson's exploits quickly became a yardstick for Marine Corps aviation. Flight training classrooms at Pensacola replayed his gun camera footage frame by frame, until rewinding wore the celluloid thin, instructors freezing the moment his traces converged at impossibly steep angles. Cadets argued whether his uncanny deflection sense was learned or innate. The consensus was that he measured closure by feel, the way a seasoned drummer anticipates the downbeat. The phrase "Hanson time" worked its way into training slang, shorthand for the instant when a pilot transitioned from pursuit to kill. A reminder that hesitating even half a second could break the geometry of victory. While historians tallied his 25 confirmed victories, fellow Marines spoke of quieter triumphs, the way he volunteered for lousy weather escorts that other aces declined, how he insisted mechanics add their names beneath each victory flag painted on his cowl, and how he mailed his flight pay to orphanages in Lucknow because, as he wrote to his pastor, "War cannot be redeemed, but mercy can be multiplied." Chaplain Leo Carlin, who met Hanson only once, later testified that the young major embodied what the Corps called the 3 iron virtues of combat leadership: competence, courage, and compassion. He fought savagely, Carlin noted, but he never permitted himself the luxury of hatred. The Medal of Honor citation, signed by President Roosevelt on August 19, 1944, distilled that paradox into formal prose. It recounted his 5 kills on August 6th, an exploit that turned the tide of an entire bombing mission, then detailed his single-handed defense of torpedo bombers over Bougainville on January 24th, where he splashed 2 zeros despite having only 3 of his 650 caliber guns functional. The citation concluded, "His superb airmanship and indomitable fighting spirit in the face of overwhelming odds enhanced and sustained the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." When the medal reached his mother, she placed it beside the cigar box of letters, not in a display cabinet or frame, but close enough that when she opened one, she could see the other glinting like a captured sunrise. After the war, Marine tacticians pored over squadron diaries to quantify what made Hanson so lethal. They discovered that in 23 of his victories, he fired less than 600 rounds, barely 1/3 of a Corsair's full ammunition load, proof that marksmanship, not volume, decided most dogfights. Engineers at the Naval Ordnance Test Station later adjusted gunsight harmonization on the F4U-4 model, based on his preferred 250-yard convergence pattern, a technical footnote that nonetheless saved unknown aviators during Korea. Decades later, when the Marine Corps equipped the AV-8B Harrier with a heads-up display, the software engineers included a selectable Hanson mode that emulated his favored close-range bullet programming. Few pilots chose it, but those who did reported a psychological connection across time, as though guided by his steady hand. Cultural memory proved equally inventive. In 1951, Popular Aviation serialized a two-part profile titled Corsair Fury, the Robert M. Hanson story, illustrated with lurid oil paintings of swirling dogfights above emerald atolls. Hollywood took interest, yet script drafts stalled because no screenwriter could reconcile Hanson's measured gentleness with the cinematic appetite for swagger. Ultimately, his legacy survived not through film, but through oral tradition in ready rooms where junior officers traded Hansonisms. Never pull the trigger unless you can read the enemy's tail number. Leave the last resort to luck. Use everything else first. Hum a hymn on the climb out because calmness is fuel. Hanson's wingmen aged into grandfatherhood, and on each February 3rd they telephoned one another, the conversation beginning not with "hello," but with the brief radio code they had shared before diving into Rabaul, "Snap 1 blue, tally-ho." In 1974, 3 of them pooled retirement checks to erect a bronze plaque on the Bougainville airstrip foundations, though jungle vines soon reclaimed the site. When a brushfire swept the area 30 years later, helicopter crews found the plaque. Blackened but intact, the inscription still legible. "He traded time for freedom and left eternity on our logbooks." In Lucknow, where Hanson had toddled in dusty courtyards, the Emmanuel Evangelical Hospital dedicated a children's wing in his honor. American visitors sometimes puzzled at the portrait above the door, showing a lank, smiling pilot in khakis beside a Corsair whose nose art read "Fury." Beneath the frame, a Hindi translation of Psalm 139 reminded parents that even in remote corners of the earth, "If I take the wings of the dawn, thy hand shall lead me." Nurses unfamiliar with the details of World War II nonetheless told recovering children that the flyer on the wall once fought monsters so they could dream unafraid, a legend as elastic as hope itself. Historians continue to debate whether Hanson's final strafing run was strictly necessary. Some argue the anchored freighter posed minimal threat to imminent landings. Others maintain its destruction saved lives. What remains unarguable is the existential logic by which Hanson lived. Where risk intersected mission, he moved forward. Manuscripts uncovered in the Marine Corps oral history program include an unpublished interview with his roommate, Lieutenant Walter Kostler, who claimed Hanson privately feared dying without making a difference. "Bob admitted terror like anyone," Kostler said. "He just refused to let terror dictate his ceiling." Perhaps the most profound testament lies not in archived combat reports, but in the generational chain he forged. In 1996, the first female Marine fighter pilot to qualify on the FA-18 Hornet carried a laminated photo of Hanson in her flight suit pocket, declaring during a press conference that his example proved excellence does not belong to era or gender. It belongs to discipline. She later named her daughter Robin Murray. On the girl's 10th birthday, they visited the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, where Hanson's flight gloves rest under glass, the leather still faintly creased at the knuckles. A docent explained that those gloves withstood cockpit temperatures surpassing 100 degrees, salt sweat etching permanent lines. Robin pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "Hot, but not burning," a phrase her mother adopted as a squadron motto. By the early 21st century, as drones replaced dogfights and satellite data eclipsed seat-of-the-pants instinct, analysts still mined Hanson's engagements to remind algorithms what human audacity could achieve when seconds mattered. A 2019 Rand Corporation study on man-machine teaming cited his August 6, 1943, mission as a benchmark for cognitive overmatch, concluding that despite primitive instrumentation, he processed sensory input faster than modern helmet-mounted cueing systems by virtue of sheer situational intuition. The report recommended future AI incorporate a Hanson heuristic for predictive maneuver modeling. Act one step earlier than prudence suggests, provided moral purpose justifies the gamble. What endures beyond mathematics is the resonance of a life lived at full throttle, a steady moral compass amid roaring cylinders. In a letter to Beloit College written 6 months before his death, Hanson reflected on walking alone across the campus quad at dusk, feeling the pull of duty toward a world at war. "If I survive," he confessed, "I hope to return and finish. My degree perhaps teach boys that velocity without direction is drifting, but direction without velocity is merely wishing." He did not survive, yet through classrooms, ready rooms, hospital wings and prayer circles, he continues to teach. Velocity and direction fused along his flight path, drawing a bright straight line through history's clouded sky. Somewhere beyond Lincoln Point, coral polyps have encrusted bits of duralumin and blended them into reef, nature's alchemy transforming wreckage into sanctuary for parrotfish and anemone. Divers who descend there during slack tide report shards of perspex sparkling like frozen air bubbles, while octopi slip through cylinder-head ribs now sheltering young turtles. The sea, indifferent yet generous, recycles sacrifice into color. And when sunlight slants just right through the water column, the scattered fragments reflect upward as shimmering bands, like thin contrails arcing toward a vanishing horizon. Thus the story circles back to a boy on an Iowa rooftop, eyes tracking distant vapor streaks while evening swallowed the prairie. He could not have known that one day strangers would read his name etched on bronze, that fighters would rehearse Hanson bursts, or that children in India would heal beneath a wing bearing that same name. He knew only that the sky offered promise, and he vowed to meet it on his own terms. In doing so, Major Robert Murray Hanson left a legacy measured not merely in 25 victories, but in uncounted lives lifted by the updraft of his example. Proof that a single fleeting life, spent without compromise, can echo far beyond the roar of any engine.